Dr. Kurtz.
I think that the world has battled a long time to get a separation of religion and science. And science can only proceed when we could not or need not find occult explanations. Similarly, the battle between religion and politics is ongoing. And democracies can only develop where there is a separation of church and state, and political judgments are made independent of religion. The battleground now is to see whether or not religion and morality can be distinguished, and whether or not we can make moral judgments independent of religion. Now, I submit that we can and we do. Indeed, there's a great tradition in Western civilization, tracing it from Aristotle through Kant down to the present time, in which it is clear that there's an autonomy of moral judgments, that people can make wise decisions. There is a field known as practical wisdom, and a man or a woman, a child, can learn how to make decisions in concrete situations. He or she does not have to refer to God. If Johnny hits Mary and Johnny's mother says, "Don't hit Mary," why should he not hit Mary? Because God exists? No. If you hit Mary, she'll hit you back. She won't like you. You won't have any friends if you continue this. In other words, the child needs reasons for growth and development. And that is who and what we are as moral beings. We are moral beings. We're capable of that. And that's the whole basis of the society. And to say that in order to solve a moral dilemma or to teach moral virtue, you need to believe in God simply is not true, and it's not true in specific cases. Now, you say theism is an adequate foundation, but you've not answered my question. Whose theism? This varies from culture to culture. If you look at the history of human civilization, the Crusades, the Inquisition, the Jihad, the conflicts today in Northern Ireland and Bosnia and the Middle East, all over the world, it's the conflict of people who believe in God, and yet the belief in God does not enable them to solve these moral problems. I believe in God, yes, and so we will kill you in the name of God. I mean, that is a basic problem. God does not provide an adequate foundation for moral choices. If you're going to deal with moral choices, you have to deal with human experience. You test principles by their consequences. You evaluate alternatives in the balance. You examine means and ends to achieve your goals. You confront various values, and you try to work out by negotiation and compromise. In the present world, we need to negotiate our differences and to work out common set of values which will enable us to move ahead. Now, you ask, why should we prefer the human species over and above other species? Well, we are humans, and we love one another. We can. We live with one another. Morality is human. You say, this morality is created in the image of man and it is insufficient. Well, I submit that theism is created in the image of man, that human beings create gods. If lions had gods, they would be lion-like in character, that religions are relative to social conditions and historical epochs, and merely to say that there is God and God will tell us what to do does not answer the question. You claim that we need a doctrine of salvation in order to judge this life. I find no evidence for salvation, no evidence that with the death of the body, the spirit or the soul lives on. This is simply an article of faith, and your religious morality in the last analysis is based on your religious faith. It seems to me that it's important that we go beyond faith and we try to work out our moral differences and agreements on rational grounds. So it's reason, not faith, that is the method by which our moral differences can be resolved. Thank you. Dr. Craig.
Well, of course, my appeal tonight has been precisely to reason and not to faith. I've argued two things. First, that if theism is true, we have a sound foundation for morality. We have objective moral values, objective moral duties in the divine commands, and moral accountability. And Dr. Kurtz hasn't disputed any of those points. Instead, what he's done is brought up red herrings. For example, he says, we can make moral judgments in the absence or independent of religion. Of course we can. I agree with that. You don't need to believe in God in order to recognize that you ought to love your children rather than torture them. But the question is, what is the ontological foundation of that objective moral duty that we all sense? And that is, as he said, the central ethical question that needs to be addressed. He also says, again, well, what about if Johnny hits Mary? What happens then? The point is, why is it wrong for Johnny to hit Mary? This kind of thing goes on all the time in the animal kingdom. Remember, we saw that there's even infanticide. Lions and other animals eat their offspring. So why is it that it's objectively morally wrong for human Homo sapiens to behave in these ugly ways toward one another? On an atheistic view, we're just primates. And I can't see anything wrong with primates doing these kind of things to each other, given atheism. And again, Dr. Kurtz asked, well, whose theism? That's not the question here tonight. That's the secondary question. If we do see that there is not an adequate foundation for morality in the absence of God, then we need to go and ask the question, well, which God exists? Now, I'm a Christian theist, so let me lay out Christian theism then as my foundation for morality, and Dr. Kurtz can tell us then what's wrong with Christian theism in terms of objective moral values, moral duties, and moral accountability. So I don't think he said anything to show that theism is inadequate as a foundation for morality. Now, my second point, and I think more important, is that if theism is false, I just don't see any foundation for morality on his view. What is the basis on atheism for objective moral value? He says, well, it's just because we are human. Yeah, but why think that human beings are special? Why is this primate species special instead of chimpanzees or bonobos? Imagine that an extraterrestrial race came from another planet who are as superior to us in intelligence as we are to pigs and cows, and began to farm the earth and use us as food and laboring animals. What could the atheists say to show them that human beings have intrinsic moral value, that you oughtn't to do this to human beings? They would say your values and principles are just the blind product of the evolutionary process that spawned you. It has no objectivity, has no binding force upon us. So I can't see any reason to think that this prejudice in favor of the human species is justified on atheism. He tries to turn the tables in by saying, but I say theism is just created. Maybe it is. That's not the debate tonight. Remember, my claim is a conditional claim. If theism is true, we have a sound foundation for morality. I'd be happy to come back to F&M again for another debate on the question of the existence of God and present good reasons, I think, to believe that theism is true. But for tonight's debate, it's sufficient to defend that conditional claim that if theism is true, we have a sound foundation for morality. If theism is false, there isn't any foundation for the affirmation of objective moral values, for the existence of moral duties. Where do those come from on atheism? Or for moral accountability and acts of self-sacrifice. In short, I personally think that humanism is just utterly intellectually bankrupt. It has no basis for the affirmation of the moral values that we all, I think, sense are true. They have the right values. We all believe in the intrinsic value of human beings and in love for one another and cooperative behavior. But what the theist can offer the humanist is a foundation, a secure foundation for the affirmation of those values that we all hold dear and want to cling to. And therefore, I would like to challenge Professor Kurtz tonight to consider becoming a believer in God. I think that if he will believe in God and put God into his metaphysic, into his ontology, it will give him a foundation for those very humanistic values that he wants to affirm and that we as Christian theists also affirm.